former minister and founder of Something or Other Publishing, Wade Franson, is the host of Created in the Image of God, a series that examines the role of religion in society, from messianic returns to the emotive responses transmitted through our culture. Wade fearlessly addresses reality claims from all directions, objectively exploring their compatibility with Holy Scripture. Joining him is Daniel Sanderson, CEO of Planksift, an international philosophy and cultural media outlet, helping emerging thought leaders with personal branding by co-creating organic content. Tonight's episode: How I Escaped Evangelicalism.
Welcome, everybody. My name is Daniel Sanderson, and I'm really happy to bring somebody on the show who I've just met over the last few weeks, and we've hit it off quite well. In this show, we're going to dive into Cameron's journey of leaving the evangelical Christian faith and the reasons for making such a significant decision. Evangelicalism is a religious movement that emphasizes the personal experience of salvation and the authority of the Bible. It has a massive following worldwide, with millions of devoted followers. However, like any other belief system, it is not immune to criticism and scrutiny. Cameron Cowan is a former evangelical Christian who left the faith and became a humanist. His journey of questioning, doubting, and eventually leaving the evangelical faith was difficult. Cameron's story is a powerful example of how one's beliefs can evolve and change over time, and the challenges one may face. During this live show, Cameron will share his personal story and the insights he's gained from his experience. He will also explore some common issues people face when they leave their faith, such as the fear of losing their community, the struggle of guilt, and the search for meaning and purpose. Cameron is an author and creator of the Cameron Journal, making observations, and my camera seems to be acting a little bit weird. So please bear with me. Cameron, as I mentioned, is an author, and he is the creator of the Cameron Journal. He makes observations and profound conversations about the world around us. He grew up as an evangelical, bisexual, and biracial individual in Denver. With a vintage flair in much of his work, his music, religion, business, and political expertise has provided the background for his broad writing approach. We invite you to join us for this engaging conversation and share it with your thoughts and experiences in the comments below. Let's dive in.
Hi.
Cameron, my friend, how are you doing?
Hello. Yes. It looks like you're still having some technical difficulties there.
Yes, I am. I'm having to hold my camera, which was a little unexpected, but we're going to roll with it.
All right. All right. Well, how would you like to begin?
Well, I want to know how are you doing today? What's what is how's Cameron today?
Yes, today was a lovely sunny day here in Seattle. We're at the end of the rain, so we're ready for sun, and today is the first of a run of sunny and warm weather into the weekend. So that was good, and it's a Tuesday, so there's always a lot going on, but I've been looking forward and preparing to do this all day, so I'm feeling great.
Wow, thank you. That's really I mean, it really shouldn't be that much pressure, right? I mean, it's we're a pretty relaxed group of people here. And
no, I was even taught. I was in an Uber earlier with a Muslim gentleman from Afghanistan, and I told him I was doing this, and he was a bit disappointed that we weren't talking about Islam more, and he was really passionate about the similarities between Christianity and Islam, which is very interesting. So it really has been an all day thing. So truly.
Interesting. Yeah, I'd love to learn more about that, about Islam and the culture. But maybe for a different show.
No, no,
Hey,
I
Cameron.
told him that. I said the problem, is that, we've had this terrible relationship with the Middle East all these years, and so people are kind of a bit averse to it. No, we very frankly had that conversation. So, yeah, it's certainly something I continue to explore when I have, time to read and all this type of thing. So, yeah,
Mhm. Okay.
it's
Well,
yeah.
look, I want you in a sentence or two to tell me a little bit, and I'm going to give you 3 points to touch on. I'm going to throw them all out so you can sort of scaffold in your answer, because this is the point in the show where the audience just gets to know you a little bit. So, no, first of all, I'd like you to talk a little bit about your background. Okay. Then I'd like you to go into your upbringing. And then I'd also like you to tell us a little bit about your experience with homeschooling. You think you could weave the three of those into a little bit of a personal narrative?
Yes, yes. Well, my name is Cameron Lee Cowan. As you said in the beginning, I write at the Cameron Journal. I've written all sorts of places on a lot of things as the years have gone by. I started writing when I was 17 in 2005, and I have 3 books out. We'll get to more of that as the show goes on. Um, and so that is kind of as far as professional goes. That's kind of how that goes. I was born in Denver, Colorado. I'm one of the very few native Coloradoans that you will find.
Hmm.
We're a scarce bunch. Um, and then I also grew up in Northwest Arkansas with my grandma outside of Fayetteville. Um, so go Razorbacks in the fall when college football comes back. And then in 2014, I moved up here to Seattle, which has been a wonderful and amazing experience, especially as someone who never thought I would leave Denver. Like, and then people were kind of encouraging me to get out, so that was fun. As far as other kind of things to get into homeschooling and all this type of thing, I my parents started homeschooling and going to independent Baptist churches and a Southern Baptist church at one point. When I was about 8 years old. So I did the first 4 grades. Well, I guess I was 10. The first 4 or so grades in a private Montessori school. Um, and then I when I was 7 years old in 1995, I was diagnosed with very severe asthma, and I was out of school for probably 3 months. Well, when you miss a lot of school in like second grade, you end up falling light years behind all your peers. And so for me, getting back into school was really tough because I was just so behind and I was still really sick, and it was just not a good thing. And so given that I was just kind of really far behind, my parents opted to homeschool. I think for us, church started out as kind of a social thing, a kind of way to, meet other people, keep me involved with other kids, all this type of thing. Also, in the homeschooling world, it doesn't take very long before you run into evangelical fundamentalist homeschooling. Now, this is especially true back in the 90s. It's less so now. There's a lot of people who are secular and homeschool, but back then, secular homeschoolers were like finding a unicorn. Most in our world in Colorado, in the Denver metro area, if you were a homeschooler, you usually were some flavor of religion. Some people would do it because they were Mormon. We were Baptist and evangelical and fundamentalist. So it doesn't take too long before you run into those worlds. And so I think there was a real community there, um for my family to engage in, and that was kind of how we got into it. My mother had gone to a small Baptist church in Texas when she was growing up as a kid, but her mother was not, and her stepfather were not religious, so it was very kind of sporadic. My dad grew up with no religion to speak of whatsoever, although he did go to Catholic high school, interestingly enough. So it was a real kind of interesting change kind of for everybody involved, sort of thing. And then I would remain in that world of homeschooling and evangelicalism until I was 18 in 2006. And um, and I'll leave the surprise
Yeah.
for later as to how the beginning of the end, as it were. Um, so yeah, I got to do a lot of really cool things because I was in homeschooling. I was in a organization called Teen Pact, which was helping engage young evangelical teenagers to government, media, and politics. So I got to go to Washington D.C. with a big group of homeschooling kids. um I've gotten to work on political campaigns. I was a legislative aide in the Colorado State Senate when I was 17. In fact, I was underage, so they couldn't pay me until I turned 18. So I got like a stack of checks on my 18th birthday.
Oh.
Um, and yeah, and so I got to do a lot of really cool things. I was a professional musician for years and years. I'm a classically trained flautist. I taught, had students, had a studio, taught and performed youth orchestra. A lot of really cool things. That was,
Hmm.
really kind of a lot of fun. Lots of band, lots of choir. My mother sang in the choir at church a lot. I did both, church choir and orchestra as well. Got to do a lot of really cool performances, all this type of thing. So it was really, it was those aspects of it were really cool and were some unique experiences that other people don't necessarily have. And my education was through a company called Abeka, which is connected to Pensacola Christian College in Pensacola, Florida. They're kind of one of the big two homeschool programs that were popular when I was being homeschooled in the 90s. It was Bob Jones and Abeka. Those were kind of the big two. And so I got to go to band camp at Pensacola Christian College twice as well, and that, and kind of go through that whole program. I also got to study Latin. I had specific writing English tutor, so I had a very kind of I would say I have a very old-fashioned classical style of education, heavy on reading and experience and all this type of thing. The liberal arts stuff didn't really come till college, so
Hmm.
it was a crazy ride. So yeah, and that kind of brings us up to how we got here today. I'm neurodivergent, I'm autistic, and I have ADHD, which I found out a couple years ago, which makes so many things about my life make sense all of a sudden. That's been a whole journey. You can go read about that. Hi, my name is Cameron, and I'm autistic at cameronjournal.com. You can go read about all that. Um,
What does
but
neurodivergent
yeah.
mean?
So neurodivergent basically means anybody that has a neurological condition that's different from what we would normally expect in human neurology. This includes even things like dyslexia.
Oh, yeah. Okay.
It basically means that there's kind of the standard format for human neurology, and if you are different than that, divergent, neurodivergent. It's a portmanteau.
Oh, okay. Yeah, perfect. Okay, perfect.
Yeah.
Okay, that was great. I mean, I think that really gives everybody the context and a very nice background for getting to know you virtually in tonight's episode. So, right now, what we're going to do is we're going to go to break. We're going to play a small commercial, and then we're going to bring on Wade into this conversation. So, everybody, just hold on, and we're going to play a word from our sponsor and a future. Um, Anthology that we're trying to get submissions for. So this one's called Cultural Journalism.
Your story has the power to start a movement. Journalism is more than a tool for broadcasting news. It's an important way of fostering meaningful cultural relationships that create tangible change in our society. With our anthology Cultural Journalism, you can now do your part and make your mark. From expert writers to passionate amateur, everyone has a story to tell. Our aim is to promote equality, empathy, and create a safe space for different perspectives and interpretations of the world around us. Come join us today and break free from the toxic news cycle. By submitting your story to Cultural Journalism at info@soupllc.com.
Wow, Cameron, it was so awesome sitting in the studio behind the curtain, listening to you explain your background. So many things I want to ask about. First of all, thank you for being on the show tonight. And I'm looking forward to diving into the topics you raised and beyond. First question I have for you is, you mentioned Montessori school. Could you reiterate when you went to Montessori exactly? What grades?
Yes, so that would be first through like half of fourth.
Okay.
So roughly 1994 to about 1998.
So I wouldn't associate Montessori with evangelical. You mentioned then, I almost got the impression that maybe the evangelical fundamentalism came a little bit later, that your parents discovered it. You mentioned your dad
It,
wasn't religious.
yes, it
When did that
did.
happen in that time frame?
Yeah, that happened. It all kind of, our transition to homeschooling and our starting to go to church happened around the same time. Um, we were not going to church when I was in school at the Montessori school. Not that anyone should associate Montessori with the evangelical movement. Montessori is a wonderful education program created by the first Italian female doctor. It's lovely, it's brilliant, it's an amazing way to learn. If you can afford it, please send your kids there. They will be made better for having done it. Yeah, it for me, it did start later than a lot of other people. I have dear friends who also grew up the same way. For them it was from birth, like literally, like their parents were already it was from birth. For me, I was a latecomer relatively speaking.
Well,
Because I
so
was only 9 when we started doing all that.
yeah, so I felt an immediate empathy, connection with you in reading a little bit about your story, and I'm beginning to see why. But I want to share a little anecdote. So for me, it was very similar. I came into the whole religion fundamentalism at about that same age. Um, Coming out of third grade, that's when the kidnapping happened. I went to fourth grade in Sweden, and by the time I was in fifth grade, my dad was in this fundamentalist group, and the reason he lost custody is because the beliefs of the group told him that women should be subservient to men. So when he got in front of the Supreme Court judge in Sweden, he basically told her she had no business being a judge, which didn't exactly sit well with her granting him custody of a child in Sweden, of all things. But he thought,
Not an egalitarian Sweden, I should say not.
but he thought God would have his back on that one, right? He thought he was standing up for the truth and God would grant him victory. And that didn't prove to be true. But my point in bringing this connection up was the timing, and it's interesting. But I want to make a comment about Montessori, and thank you for praising it. Fast forward, my whole school experience was so awful, so completely and utterly awful, that I was terrified about what I was going to do to my children by whatever school I sent them to. And so when our daughter was 3 and was in Imagination Station, which was like a daycare, and that wasn't going well, we toured a Montessori facility, and they have parents can come in and watch, and we watched a live classroom, and these 30 kids were all engaged in learning. They were all deep in learning. They were all engaged around the classroom, up and around, taking charge of their own education in third grade. And I literally broke down crying because I had taught fourth and fifth grade as part of my journey, and realized the system is so utterly broken, right? The educational system. And here Maria Montessori, by her method of following the child, studying how does a child learn, what captivates the mind of a child, how can you inspire them to learn? And she nailed it, and it works. And the teachers were floating peacefully like swans across the classroom, helping this one, helping that one on their exploratory journey. I literally broke down crying. It was like a religious experience. The dove descending, here it was. This is what education should have been like, and that's what I wanted for my daughter. She went through 8th grade. When she went into high school, we had to move. My son only got to go through 5th grade in the Montessori, but yeah, full unqualified endorsement for the Montessori method of education.
Yeah, what's kind of entertaining is a lot of most of Scandinavia has adopted a similar system for their education system, even the Baltics. They don't do standardized testing. The classroom situation is very open. A lot of it's very project based. It kind of has a very kind of Oxford sort of feel to it. And they, when you talk to people who come from that system and you look at our system, which is stuck in the 19th century German system, they just shake their heads because they've tried that and it didn't work. And they went to a different thing that worked much better. So if you want to hear about that, you can read my essay on education in my book, What the Hell is Going On? But
Thank you.
Where I write all about that and the problems with the education system. But yes.
So, quick question then, going back to some of those early comments. Early illness, did that make you introspective? What impact do you perceive that those early illnesses and how it changed your trajectory? You probably, at some level of psychology, associated that with the move from a Montessori educational experience, which I assume was very pleasant for you as a young child, to something else that perhaps was increasingly less pleasant. How did the illness then play into the development of who Cameron is?
It's something where, and I've said this, to people, I have been dealing with poorly functioning lungs for so long. I probably can't clearly articulate all the ways in which it affects my life because some of these things are just habits that I just do. I don't keep a lot of dust in the house. I like things to be, cleaner and tidy. I'm very sensitive to changes in weather. That's my primary trigger, is changes in the weather. And so this week has been tough because we've been transitioning from wet and clouds to warm and sunny. So it's been fun, but I think it's kind of part and parcel because it affects like the jobs that I've done. Like I could never go do construction or day labor. My lungs wouldn't support it, so I had to find other things along the way. Those kind of whole things that were kind of shut down, doors that were sort of closed because I just knew my health couldn't do it. And the reality is, if I don't take care of that aspect of my health, I could literally be dead in a half hour. That almost happened in 2010. I had 2 hospitalizations back to back. That was fun. But I mean, so it's something that is just everywhere. It's where I travel. It's where I live. I moved here because my lungs were struggling at Denver's 5,280 feet. And also it's so dry and my lungs like oxygen and moisture. So I literally moved house 1,500 miles to the West Coast to be at a lower altitude with more oxygen and more moisture. So I think it affects everything, every big decision. I have to be in the mind of, can I breathe there? Really.
Of tons of moisture in Seattle. I was living in Bellingham, just north of Seattle, when the kidnapping took place way back in my background. So how long have you been in the Seattle area?
9 years this year.
Oh, wow.
Yep. So
well,
and I came up here in 2014 and it's been a fun ride since.
I'll have to talk about that a little bit more, perhaps offline. Don't know. I'd be interested perhaps more than the audience. I want to then get into one more question about your background, the influence of music. How do you feel being that involved in music, being a professional musician, studying it? How has that affected your thinking? Because music is a language and it has a cognitive impact on it strengthens your cognitive abilities in a number of ways, right? How do you feel that music has shaped your ability to analyze a situation or express a situation, whatever? What has it brought you intellectually?
I don't necessarily really think it brought me very much intellectually that way. I know people that, are brilliant at math because they were good at music and did piano, whatever have you. I can read music and teach music theory, and that's all fine and well. For me, I'm a terrible sight reader. I need to live it and experience it and rehearse it over and over again until my body gets what I'm doing and then do it. So I will not sit there and be playing, addition and subtraction with the notes in a measure. I need to play it. I need to hear it. I need to feel it. I need to be kind of like, okay, when they do that, I do this. And this is why I was never a good session musician, because a session musician, you're supposed to walk in, here it is, play it.
So you're less of a jazz musician than more of a. So what about
Yeah.
emotionally? How has music helped you deal with emotional issues, if at all?
Well, that is everywhere. I'm the type of person that always has some music going. I'm that neurodivergent. There's some people who are neurodivergent must have silence, and there are some that are neurodivergent must have music. I must have music.
Yeah.
And I have a lot of things that I associate with big moments or stuff that I knew I was listening to and stuff happened. I can go through my playlists on Apple Music in my phone and be kind of like, oh yeah, this playlist was when this terrible thing was happening,
Yeah.
or when this incident was happening, or oh, that's the breakup. That's my playlist. I had when I broke up with my ex girlfriend. Like that's all sorts of fun stuff in there. Like
Yeah.
so
Got
yeah,
it.
it's something where music is kind of the soundtrack of my life, and different songs, different things remind me of different times and places, and it's yeah.
Well,
So
great. So, I mean, those were questions that just a personal interest as you as a human being, understanding what makes you tick, and helping share a little bit of that with the audience, different ways of looking at things. Now, let's get into more, beliefs, circumstances, situations related to the title of this show, which maybe that's why some people are here and they want us to get into it, and I'm looking forward to it too. First question about your experiences in evangelicalism. Would you say you were ever a true believer? Did you adopt the belief system as your own? Were you fully and actively participating in it, or were you more of a kind of, I went along with it, didn't really fully believe it, or I was a skeptic the whole time? Or did you go through phases of each while you were in that world?
no, I tried to I really tried to go along with it. I guess you could say I was a true believer. I also grew up in an environment where those who questioned didn't last long. Um, and I've heard this in from other people in the ex-evangelical community, um, including one who's a very dear friend for 10 years. Her and I grew up very similarly. Our parents are practically the same people. It's a little weird. Um, and it's something where, yeah, you might as a little kid be a bit skeptical or asking questions or whatever have you, but you very, very quickly figure out that's not okay. And so honestly, for me, in my autistic brain, it's like, well, I have to do X, Y, and Z and follow these rules and do this, that, and the third. And so it was kind of very structured. And so in that way, I was kind of able to follow along. Now, that didn't make people like me any better because I looked like this going and growing up in an all white world. So that was my first problem. My second problem was always had a weight problem, and my third problem was my mother brought me to her present marriage from a previous relationship. So the parents I grew up with are white and I'm not. So that was fun. In fact, sometimes still in restaurants, people will ask my parents for a table for two, and they'll have to say, no, he's with us. That's a thing. And so that, that was there was a lot of kind of barriers within that. I also, because I always wanted to be popular. I always wanted people to like me. I always wanted to be friends with everybody. I didn't really care who you were. Um, I tried very actively to do things that would kind of get people to like me so I could fit in better. The thing, evangelicalism, like a lot of other religions, has a very stratified social hierarchy schedule. Um, and so, in the world I grew up in, pastors and their kids and missionaries and their kids were kind of at the top. Then there was kind of deacons and important church people, particularly if they had a lot of money, were kind of the next circle down. And then you had, the volunteer corps, those that ran programs, taught Sunday school, did meals, blah, blah, blah. They were kind of the next level. And then there was kind of everybody else. And how high up you were, depending on if you were in one of those things or closely associated with people who were. And
Very, very, very well analyzed and succinctly stated. Thank
You're
you.
welcome.
Because it's very true.
Yes, and so
And I
yeah.
don't even feel like you're excessively being critical. You're just saying, hey, this is how it works.
Every
This
group
is
of
what it
humans
is.
has some sort of, we do social hierarchy as humans.
Exactly.
And so every
Exactly.
group has it, every organization has it. This is just how this particular organization worked. And
Yeah.
so for me and our family, because we did the music thing, and my mom is a great singer and was in the choir, and I was doing music stuff later as well, that kind of got us into that thing, which got us a little bit higher up um the social stratification.
So it was kind of working for you and your family for a while, kind of.
I would say it worked better for my parents than it did for me necessarily. I struggled a lot with relating to my peers, all this type of thing. Part of that was the isolation from homeschooling. Part of that is I'm autistic and ergo super weird. You know, I want to sit around and do this, talk and share ideas and
be a geek in some way.
right.
And
Yes. And in the late 90s, early 2000s, that wasn't cool. It's more so now, but it was very uncool back then. And so I had a hard time. I didn't have friends till college. Let's be clear. I really didn't have friends until college. Another kind of aspect of that is one of the things autistic people do, and I did this as a child, is we mimic and imitate a lot because we don't necessarily have our own thing, our own personality. We kind of adopt the pieces of other people. And for my mother, she had very strict ideas of behavior and all this type of thing. She didn't really want me acting like other kids. So not only was I saying different things, I was dressing different, I was looking different, I was sounding different. Everything about me was different. And kids will destroy you for that. They really will. And so that made it a little bit more difficult. There were my parents definitely did run into some social problems of their own, but I feel like it worked better for them than it ever really did for me.
Who was the driver of this in your family? Was it mom or dad that was more zealous? Were they both equally zealous?
I would say I think it was my mom that was kind of very much leading the way on all of this sort of thing. Not to say my dad was just along for the boat ride. But she definitely was the one that was kind of really, it was her idea to begin with, I think. So so that, there were some definite, but I mean, we got to go to a lot of interesting churches, both very large and very small. Met a lot of interesting people along the way you probably would have never met under any other circumstances. And got to see and experience a lot of really interesting things. So
as you probably know, you mentioned you'd watched a couple of the shows to familiarize yourself with it, and the audience would know, but I'll say it here. One of the core tenets of this show is religion should inspire, never coerce. The role of religion in society, as a subtitle, it should inspire, not coerce. That's one aspect of what I want to bring up next. The other one is now I just distracted myself and lost my train of thought. Haven't had enough caffeine today. So let me go to a different question. This will come back to me. What have you retained from that time that you value? Because to me, you come across like somebody who's analyzed this and made choices, don't seem to have a degree of strong bitterness, what they would call in that world a root of bitterness, right? Which is great, because I believe there is such a thing. You don't seem to have it at all, to me. So what have you retained that you felt was valuable to keep, and what have you shed from those experiences?
I mean, I will say for my own self, there's very little of that left in life today. I have not actively been a part of that world since 2006. And perhaps we'll get into how and why I left Um, and so it's been a long time. It's been almost 20 years. It's been 18 years, I think. No, 17 years, because I'm 35. So it's been 17 years. It's been 15 years since I darkened the door of a church of that type. It's
So more out than you were in since you started a little later.
Yes, and I mean, my attendance at anything religious has been rather sparse since then. I did go and explore other faiths and other pathways. I did go and explore other things. I eventually began studying Western esoterica, which is based on Judaic Kabbalah. And I studied that for a good long. That's what I spent most of my 20s doing, was therapy from trauma and spiritual work to try to fix myself. The therapy was more effective than the spiritual work, I think. And it ended up kind of being autism all the way through anyway. And so so that, is kind of how we got there to that. But there's not a whole lot left. There's still a lot of I here's the thing I do like. Because I read the Bible so much, I used to read it on about a 66 to 100-day cycle. Because I read about it so much, spent so much time with the text, all this type of thing, it gives me a great ability to talk frankly about what's in that book, what things are talked about, what the stories mean, some of the weirder things that people don't talk about. I've also had a chance to look at it as literature. I have a master's of fine arts and creative writing from Goddard College. So I've had a chance to look at it in terms of literature. I've had a chance to look at it in terms of cultural impact as kind of a sociocultural document. All these different aspects, and I was able to do it because I know it. I know the text so well.
Yeah. Well, we're gonna have you back on the show in the future to dive into that. I want to circle back now on this question which came back to me. Then we're going to go to a commercial break, and when we come back, we're going to hear about those events that sounds like somewhat dramatically caused you to now 15 years later not have darkened the doorway of a church in 15 years. The question I wanted to bring up, or the observation really, was in talking about your somewhat neutral, objective view of those experiences. The one criticism that I would level against those groups, this is for anybody, because it's not only germane or specific to the evangelicals. It's really anybody, right? Anyone in any system of belief. And that is Jesus' statement in Matthew 7, "Judge not, lest ye be judged." The organization that I was a part of, criticism has been leveled at us that we used to shoot our wounded. And what that means is that if like you were describing, you weren't fully involved in those hierarchies, those groups, and you began to fall below the standards in any way, they really didn't want you there, right? Because you could reflect badly on them. They didn't do what Jesus said, which is leave the 99 and go after the one.
Yes, right? and on petty things like clothing,
right?
Literally what you did and did not wear. And I mean, there were churches. We went to churches where if you were a guy and not in a suit, everyone kind of looked down on you a little bit. It was definitely not a come as you are situation. I don't know that Jesus had a dress code for the Sermon on the Mount where he gave the Beatitudes, but we did anyway.
No, Jesus actually spoke against dress codes. He clearly articulated, and you'll know this because you obviously know the Bible quite well. He ordered you not to judge by appearances. He ordered you not to judge by appearances. He specifically not do those kinds of things.
And the sad thing is that's just one of the few ways that there's a lot of judgment by people in that world. I saw a guy get denied being a deacon in a church one time because his son, not him, bear in mind, his son had a child out of wedlock.
Right.
And that was low scandal. There was a church split one time because somebody wanted to keep traditional music and playing the organ, and the music pastor wanted to move on to something more modern.
Right.
And there was like 200 people who quit going to church because of that. This is the type of stuff that goes on, and it's so frustrating. Like back then, I felt like, it was important because I was in that world. But now I look back at it and I'm kind of like, if that's what's gonna throw you off your religion, your faith, it must not have been that serious to begin with.
Right.
So yeah, there's all sorts of little things like that, and yeah, there is all sorts of standards, and basically how much people like you, respect you, are willing to associate with you is directly based on how well you can perform the
Right.
things, the rules. It's like when I was growing up, we didn't watch a lot of TV. That was a big one. It was like, oh, well, they're more liberal, they have a TV at home, or no, they're
Right.
good people, they don't have a TV. I mean, all this sort of little nitpicky cultural stuff. And that's the currency of social hierarchy in that world.
Yep. Great. So thank you for this section. We are now going to go to a quick commercial break, and we're going to look at a book by our sponsor, Something or Other Publishing, by a woman who probably doesn't suffer from those particular issues. It's a book about grieving. It's a book about her mom. And when we come back, we'll invite Dan back in, who I think will have fixed his camera, and we're going to dive into those experiences that caused you to change the path of your life.
You're
Welcome back, everyone. If you'd like to order it, use the QR code there, which we'll show here for a few seconds. We're here with Cameron Cowan. Am I saying your name correctly?
Sure, it's Cowan, but it doesn't matter. Everyone mispronounces it. It's fine.
Cameron Cowan. And we've been learning a lot about his life, his early experiences, what shaped him, what molded him, how he got to where he's at. But now we're going to talk about the transition that's talked about in the title of this show, How I Escaped Evangelicalism. So what were those experiences? What was the trigger that led to you making a break, escaping, as it's put in the title here?
Yeah, well, it kind of started midway through high school. The first sort of trauma, my grandma, who I loved quite dearly, died when I was 15. Not unexpectedly, she had a lot of health issues. She'd had cancer 3 times, but the circumstances were unexpected. And that was something that took me 5 years to heal from. It was a long journey to get there. And I ended up writing a book about her and her life that will be out this year. And then I, especially towards the end of high school, I found myself crying and praying at night before bed, and I never heard an answer from God. There was no one there. As I jokingly used to say in my stand-up comedy act, I tried to call God and he sent me to voicemail. And that really, by the end, I was very much kind of going through the motions. But it was also a world I wasn't necessarily going to be allowed to escape. And so I graduated high school in 2006. I did a 2.5 hour concert recital for my graduation because I was homeschooled, so that was kind of it. I'd been playing band and singing in the choir at a Christian school in West Denver, so I got to go to that graduation, which was really cool. Because I'd become friends with some of those guys and all this type of thing. So, although honestly, most of my friends had left the year before, so I was kind of like, I was more excited last year than this year, but whatever. And so that was, and then I was sent to a very conservative Christian college in Pensacola, Florida, called Pensacola Christian College, connected to our homeschooling curriculum, and that was the beginning of the end, because I had been struggling with my sexuality since puberty, and I already kind of knew that my interest in men wasn't going away. Pray though I might, I'm living proof pray the gay away does not work. And the very first person I ever came out to was my high school music director, Pastor Hall. He told me not to go, and I said, I don't really have a choice. Like, the parents are packing me up and sending me down there whether I like it or not. And so I got down there, and I lasted about a month before I started to seek out help and advice with sex and sexuality. Now, keep in mind, at Pensacola, this place has 1950s levels of repression. You're not allowed to be on campus in a mixed group without a chaperone. You're not allowed to be off campus in a mixed group. Here's how sexist they are. Freshman men are allowed to leave campus on their own. Freshman women are not. That's a thing. There's very few instances where both genders, sexes are in one building. Classes and church are about it. Everything else, well, and dining, but everything else, like all the dorms are unigender as they used to be before the 70s, all this type of thing. It's a very structured world. We had to wear shirt collars and ties in the morning, polo shirts in the afternoon. In Florida, in North Florida. So a lot of sweating, a lot of laundry. And so I started to reach out to people about sex and sexuality. And one Sunday night, after hair check, because there was required hair length you had to maintain as a male, which I don't anymore. My hair goes down to the middle of my back. It's just tied up right now. After that, I was taken aside by some people in authority in the residence hall, and asked about what I had been writing and what I had been talking about. Very Stasi vibes. And I was told there was going to be a committee meeting at 8 o'clock the next morning, but I wasn't allowed to go back to my ordinary room. So I was taken to another dorm room, another part of the building, and had to wait it out there. I say wait because I didn't sleep. So at this point, when you're when you've gotten involved with administration, you're never allowed to be alone. So for the rest of my time on campus, I was followed by someone, a graduate student, someone connected with the campus and administration. I had to be attended with somebody at all times. And so the next morning, the committee comes, and many I'll not bore you with the details, but many conversations, many meetings, some very invasive personal searching. And by noon, they had called my parents. They don't say I was expelled. They would say that I was administratively unadmitted. They were very careful about that. I'm still banned from their campus, by the way. And by 1 o'clock, I was packing my stuff in my van and leaving. I had to go back at one point because I actually forgot a couple things in my hurry. But I got out of there pretty fast. They outed me to my parents. They called my parents and told them what had happened, and that about my, burgeoning homosexuality, all this type of thing. I didn't answer my parents' phone calls for several hours. I just kind of drove around town and kind of figured what I was going to do next. I figured, based upon what had happened to other people, my parents would never speak to me ever again. I figured, I mean, my whole world was over. There was no, flute teaching job at the school afterwards anymore. There was no being a music major. I wasn't even in college anymore. I was just out in the world on my own. I'm 18 years old in a state that I visited a handful of times as a kid. I've only lived in for a month. It's just me, my stuff, and my van. And I'm kind of like, well, I probably need to figure out some type of small job and see if I can find some small place to live, and we'll start from there. That was my first thought, driving off campus in September of 2006. And I eventually picked up the phone from my parents. They were a lot nicer than I thought they were going to be. I'll give them credit for that. And they convinced me to come back to Colorado. I remember telling my dad, if you give me the title to my van, you never have to speak to me ever again. I presumed I was never I was done with both of them, because that was what the pattern had been that I'd grown up with. Gay out. That's how that world works. There's no quarter given for this type of thing. And they didn't do that, and so they got me my first hotel room in Birmingham, Alabama, and so I started driving north. I got pulled over that night by Alabama State Patrol. And I told the officer, I said, I have 2 exits to get to my hotel, then I'll be off your highway, sir. And he followed me there, and that was fine. And that started, a long journey home. I saw a friend along the way in Missouri. It took me about 10 days to get home, but eventually I did get there, and then had to kind of restart my life and figure out what I was going to do from there. And that really was the end of that for me. I didn't go back to church or anything like that. I think my last church service as an actual member of any church was in Pensacola, at their church at the Crown Center on campus at PCC. And that was it. I eventually went to the University of Colorado in Greeley. I started there in January. I worked at Target in the meantime. In fact, I worked on Sundays, actually, because everybody else on my team had kids. So I took one of the weekend days, and that was kind of the beginning of me getting out into the normal world. Now, obviously, living with my parents, there was still, no TV, not a lot of music. My whole drive back, we were not allowed to have anything with headphones at Pensacola. So I had my iPod in the glove box of my van, and on it were only 2 non-Christian albums. One is The Emancipation of Mimi by Mariah Carey, and Future Sex Love Sounds by Justin Timberlake. And so the whole way back, I just switched back and forth between the radio and those 2 albums. So if I ever get a chance to meet Mariah Carey, I'd love her to tell her this story, because I think she'd find it interesting to be kind of like, yeah, it was you and me driving across America, newly expelled, freshly gay, figuring out that I'm not a bad person just because kissing other dudes seems like fun, and all this type of thing. And that was, it was you were emancipating, I was emancipating. We were all escaping. And so
I'm reminded of 2 things. To share a
please
couple
say
of
something.
anecdotes.
I've talked for too long. Please say
No,
something.
it's great. It's great. I really appreciate you sharing the story. I'm reflecting back on my time in a Christian college, and we had resident assistants, right? Resident assistants, which are like the person who's responsible for the dorm you're in. And
Yes.
I came up with the understanding that an RA, right? They were RAs, resident assistants. And I said,
Mhm.
basically, they're 2/3 rat.
Yes. Yes. No, no, that's their express job. You have to bear in mind, Pensacola was also a campus. It was also a campus that would watch you in town. They paid the
Right.
grad students to drive around looking for PCC students doing the wrong thing, and they will throw you out for anything. I knew people that had been put out 3, 4 times and
Right.
were coming back and still trying to finish their education. That was normal because the
Right.
standards of rules were so high.
was
Everyone was screwing it up
I was not
constantly.
I was not originally accepted because in the interview, you had to be interviewed by a minister to get in. And the minister that interviewed me up in Alaska said, I've only got one question for you. I've heard some rumors about you and your cars, plural, the police. Are you wanting to go to AC, Ambassador College, to escape from the law up here in Alaska? That's the only question he asked me, to which I could honestly say, no, that's not the reason. That's just a fringe benefit. I didn't add that
Right.
when I told him, no, that's not the reason I want to go. I had no thought or hope that I would get in, but I got in January mid-semester because they had thrown out so many freshmen that they were calling people up and saying, if you're still interested and you can get here in 4 days, you can get in.
Yeah.
And so that's how I got in. But fast forward, I went into the ministry, and then years later, I'm in Hawaii, and I have resigned. I resigned from the ministry. I resigned from my career with the Roy Church of God. But the last hurrah was a Feast of Tabernacles, these 8-day religious festivals. And I was celebrating this one in Hawaii. I was the interim director of family ministries globally at the time. And I was working on this thing called intergenerational Bible studies. And as part of an intergenerational Bible study, I was playing that song by the Crash Test Dummies, God Shuffled His Feet. Now, I don't know if you remember that song, but it goes, after 7 days, he was quite tired. So God said, let there be a day for picnics with wine and bread. He gathered up the people he had made and laid back in the shade. And anyway, it goes from there. But because we were a Sabbath keeping church, that 7 days and whatnot, and what the meaning and purpose of the Sabbath is and what it means to commune with God, I thought that would be a great song to introduce into these intergenerational Bible studies. Of course, the parents all freaked out that I was playing a rock song by the Crash Test Dummies as a way to open up the generation gap discussion. So I had that CD with me because I was using it in the Bible studies that I was conducting at the Feast of Tabernacles in Hawaii. And I stayed a week after to sort of sort myself out because I just resigned from the ministry and I'd planned an extra week. My wife flew back home and I was there alone. And I drove around the island in a daze listening to the Crash Test Dummies CD over and over and over again. So I could very much relate to you in that van and the drive home. I just wanted to make those comments of I can feel your pain, the confusion, figuring it out. So what's your relationship like with your parents today? How, I mean, it seems like they had at least this much of the prodigal son parable in mind, in at least not treating you as horribly as you were expecting.
Yes, it's been a journey over the last several years. We have a great working relationship today. I broke up with my ex-girlfriend the week before lockdown started in the pandemic and was literally homeless, just kind of driving around the country hanging out. And I was in a lovely antebellum mansion, West Virginia, or in Virginia for a little bit, near Charlottesville. And I couldn't find anything. I'd moved to the East Coast, couldn't find anything really happening in the East. And so I decided to shoot out to Colorado and hang out with my parents. We hung out for 2 months and it was fine. If you told me in 2006 that would ever be the case, I would have laughed in your face. But it ended up being fine. It's taken a long time. I do always say, and I tell this to intimate friends, I think my relationship with my parents is made a little bit easier by the fact that they live there and I live here. And I visit them and they visit me, but we have the freedom and levity to kind of lead our own lives and do our own thing. we still have, sometimes really tough conversations. I mentioned this in the production meeting ahead of time. The fact that I'm doing this appearance already triggered 5 separate emails and an hour-and-a-half conversation with my mother, worried about what I would say and how I would talk about this and all this type of thing. And so, but I mean, that on the bright side, though, we had a very productive conversation. No one got mad. Nobody yelled at each other, which is really good. And so I felt like that. So we have a good working relationship now. It is helped by the fact that when it comes to a lot of certain subjects, my mom doesn't need to know. There's certain things of my life that it's better if I just kind of keep those to myself. So, but it's all right. It's good.
Well, I do hope that she will listen into, if not now, to the recording, to further that opening. I struggle with, my mom died when I was 16, but I struggle with the relationship aspect with my dad, because even though I'm still very much involved in religion, it's not the particular brand that he accepts, right? So
Right.
When we come back, I know Dan's been listening intently. He's got some questions. We're going to go to a quick commercial break. Once again, one of our major sponsors is Something or Other Publishing. This one tells you a little bit about what it is and how you can get involved in the work that they do and what they can offer you. So when we come back, we'll hear more with Cameron, and Dan will get to drive some probing questions. Thanks, everyone. We'll be right back.
And welcome to Something or Other Publishing, or as our friends like to call us, Soup. Soup is a platform that connects authors, readers, and service providers in one convenient place. Choose Soup if you're an author with a great book idea and you're looking for a publisher offering hands-on coaching in some of the best royalties in the business. Or if you're a reader who enjoys engaging with celebrated and emerging authors. We already have over 3,000 of them, and more are joining every day. You can even win free books by voting on their book ideas. Or maybe you're a service provider and you're looking to engage with over 3,000 authors. We're here to help. So whether you're an author, a reader, or a service provider, you're in the right place at Soup. Contact us at help@soupllc.com to learn more.
Okay, well, I guess I'm up because I said I had a question, and I've just really intently been listening to you, Cameron, and I want to thank you for telling that story. That's an emotional testimony of your life, and probably the most important story that an individual can make. One thing that I've learned about religious confessions or testimonies and telling your story is that story, your story, is very intimate to you. It's very intimate to individual people, and I think that's one thing that I notice about religious thought or what happens in religion is that is encouraged. Now, we would say prior to coercion, or I just noticed that as a thread that seems to permeate discussions of religious conversations. My question for you was really a hypothetical, and if you walked into a church with your parents, probably one that you're familiar with, how do you anticipate that you would experience it? Would you? I don't want to put words in your mouth, but how would you anticipate that you would navigate that experience?
That has happened. Not recently. But my parents did change churches at one point, and I did go to one service with them. It was a very interesting, in a church that was kind of very independent. They still called themselves St. Mark or St. Matthew, but they had left the denomination they'd come from. The pastor had been divorced and remarried, which was, progressive. Um, and and so that has happened, and it was fine. I had somebody in college who was a missionary's wife tried to get me to come back to the fold in 2007. Um, and I went once, and kind of even by that time it had only been 3 4 not well 6 months maybe. Um, I had already kind of moved on because I was already reading other stuff. I was reading the Tao. I was really into religions with no deity there for about good 5 6 years. Um, and I had kind of, I knew that I didn't really fit into that world, and they were, more progressive and had more modern music, and it was more come as you are and all this type of thing, but it was still the same, personal relationship with Jesus Christ and your baptism and your walk and all this stuff and all this type of thing. And that just didn't hold anything compelling for me anymore. I had gotten baptized when I was 9 and gotten saved when I was 9, so I was a thinking entity when I did it. I wasn't like a lot of my peers that did it when they were 3 or 4, whatever have you, before they think they'd really realize what they were doing. And I was just, that wasn't the place for me anymore. I still have a lot of trauma from that. It makes it hard to really attend any mainstream Christian religious service. The last one I went to was in 2015. I went to Advent at the Wells Cathedral in Wells, England, which obviously was a Church of England Anglican service. And that's about as far as it goes for me, sort of thing. And that's really more
Yeah.
about the music and the celebration, not much God going on, so sort of thing. So much about the music and the celebration, anything else. And that was fine, and that was okay. But other than that, I don't do that anymore.
So what mind space could you anticipate you having a personal relationship with Jesus? Do you think that would that enter your mind again? Does it enter your mind at all?
No, I've moved on. Long moved on to other things. I studied philosophy when I was in college. I'm one of those people that's religion is the opiate of the masses, Karl Marx. That I've really left that world behind. I went on and studied Western esoterica with R.J. Stewart. And I was I was into paganism and Wicca for a while, and then I got into Western esoterica. Which is, like I said, based in Jewish Kabbalah and those practices. But even that, it's been a couple of years since I've really done that. I've kind of taken a break from all that. I spent most of my 20s in therapy, in spiritual practice, trying to sort of fix myself and sort myself out and try to get myself to a place where I could, be functional and do things and participate in society. Well, I later figured out I'm autistic, and that's all off the table. So now I'm just out here doing whatever. But
So-
I really did try to do all those things, and now I've just kind of taken a break. Knowing me, it'll circle back in my life at some point in the proper time and season for it to occur.
Nice.
But
So-
that's where my ethics and values still lie. And I've been around the corner enough to know what not having ethics and values looks like, and what having them does look like, and to know the difference between the two. So
a couple of quick questions. The main question I really want to ask, but what you just said, I want to ask again, because you've read the Bible so many times. So surely you're familiar with the story of Solomon. And according to the Bible, the wisest man who ever lived, right? The man the one single person in the Bible who had the three genie, the genie, right, with the wish. God said,
yes.
let me know what you want. And because he didn't wish for riches, because he didn't wish for glory, whatever, he asked for wisdom. And God was so impressed with that answer that he gave him those other things as well. But it's like Solomon gained his wisdom by doing all the wrong things. He gained his wisdom in the school of hard knocks, right? And he sought it in women, wine, and song, and in reading and study. So does that resonate at all with you in terms of what you just expressed? When you just said, you've looked at life with ethics and without it. It reminded me of a Solomonic statement, and I mean this in the most positive way, a wise perspective. What's your take on that?
Well, I mean, life got really crazy kind of coming out of the lid of evangelicalism, so I did all of the things that I was never allowed to do. So I hit public college like a ton of bricks. I always tell the joke, my dad bought me a box of condoms. When he dropped me off, they were gone within a week. Um, and irony of ironies, because I didn't understand bisexuality yet, I'm the only person who would get expelled from one school for being gay and then proceed to have a whole string of women and promptly meet a girlfriend 6 months later and date for a year. That's I'm the only one who's that I think that's possible to happen for. But then like you name a drug, I've done it. You name an alcohol, I've had it. Not only did I go to public college, I also worked in nightlife. In Denver and did events and hosted fashion shows and did the first iteration of Denver Fashion Week, which is now a huge fashion event connected with 303 magazine. In 2012, I mean, I used to what I have called my eat me, drink me phase, where I would eat or drink anything. I have taken weird pharmaceuticals. I have done all of the things, psychedelics, you name it, I've done it. And, and I was, willing to read stuff, have conversations with people, meet people with completely different backgrounds that I had never met before. And for me, all of this stuff was locked away. So it was all new. It was fresh. So I was just sucking it up as fast as I possibly could. I used to walk around, the edges of the campus listening and looking for house parties to invite myself to. And, and so it was a lot. And then, like I said, I followed that up by working in nightlife, which just made all of that much worse. And I came out of that situation with a business collapsing in 2013 that left me really bereft. A lot of people owed a lot of money, and stolen money by someone. And that's actually how I got back into writing. I hadn't written fiction in years and years and years. I had ran 2 magazines by that time. And I'd left Republican politics in 2012. And this business collapsed in 2013, and I started working on what would become my first novel again later that year. And that's how I got back into writing, and I started what we now call the Cameron Journal, but back then was the Cameron Cowan Show, a YouTube talk show, in the fall winter 2013, 2014. And that's how I got into that. And I kind of went out into the world for 6-7 years, and I kind of did all the things, saw all the stuff, had all the fun, all this type of thing, and kind of started to get an idea of how the world really worked. And that was being involved in the Tea Party movement, being involved in Occupy Denver, part of the Occupy movement. And that was a whole eyes opening to all the ways our economic systems
those are
all
the
of
two,
this stuff added up.
Those are the two opposing forces. I'd love to talk to you about Occupy, the Occupy movement at some time, but also the Tea Party. So were you?
I have written about both extensively.
Were you like lurching forward from ditch to ditch? What was going on there?
No, I mean, I answered the call when I was working in Republican politics. I was done running campaigns. I had a string of campaigns not go well. I was kind of getting a reputation for, I was always involved in the campaign that was failing. And so one of my friends was like, you need to get attached to a winner so people think of you as a winner, because right now they just think of you as a loser.
Right.
And I decided I was done with that. Let me go into media. That's where my home is. I wrote for my college newspaper, worked at my college radio station. Let me go into media and broadcasting. And so I went to a meeting where they were getting people together to do this magazine called Liberty Inc. Journal. And I was the only one who really had any magazine experience. I only writing for, but I was kind of the best that we had, and so I was
in
really
the land of the blind. The one-eyed man is king.
Yes, and I was the one-eyed man, and so I was the managing editor of that publication. We had a staff of 13, and quite a monthly budget of about $100,000. And we were heavily involved in the 2010 election. And I was in grad school while I did this. I was literally doing grad school, freelancing, and running this magazine. It was nuts. And so we were active in the 2010 election. And then that I was fired from that publication because an elected official didn't understand his advertising contract. And somehow that was my fault. I'm like, I told him X, Y, and Z, and he just didn't understand it. I can't help you there. And so, yeah, you haven't lived till you've been fired while you're driving your boss to the airport. And then you're driving home in the wheat in Colorado from DIA, and you don't have a job anymore.
And you didn't kick him out on the roadside?
No, because I'm too nice. And so that was that was kind of the end of that. And then I moved back to Denver after grad school because I had walking pneumonia. I was still super sick. My parents actually ended up doing most of the moving because I was so ill I couldn't hardly do anything. I packed it all, but in terms of getting it out of the house, I was just, no, I had no lung power. And so I moved back in 2011, and when Occupy kind of broke out that summer, I was producing a show called Flight 93, A True Story of Courage, which is a play written by the guy who wrote the screenplay for the movie about Flight 93. And I was producing that summer, and then I also started getting involved in Occupy. And that was the beginning of my move to more liberal politics. I met people and discovered...
Tangent question.
Yeah.
From left field or right field now. Are you a follower of Matt Taibbi? Have you perhaps followed him for a while? I'm just curious.
I have, because
you just evoked him because I used to read him religiously, pun intended, when he was a flaming liberal writing for Rolling Stone, just eviscerating anything that even remotely leaned conservative, right? And
yes.
And of course, now we see he's been pushed way to the other side, and I don't think he was either liberal or conservative in a true sense of the word.
Yeah, I mean, I had, in college, I had kind of stayed true to my views on things. I did vote for Barack Obama in 2008. Not happily, but I thought he was better than John McCain, and I certainly didn't like Sarah Palin. And so, but then I voted for Mitt Romney in 2012. So I only voted for Obama once. And so I kind of kept my beliefs to that. And then for me, it was really me going to Occupy and seeing all the ways in which our system fails people over and over and over again.
My heart is there.
My eyes to a world I didn't know existed at that time. I didn't know.
My heart is there, but this is teeing up a future show because I really want to have you back if you're willing. But my position on Occupy is you can't occupy that which you do not own. And ownership, taking ownership in the full sense of the word, is the key, in my opinion. And of course, I'm using the word in general terms. I'm not really advocating necessarily for capitalistic ownership, but I'm saying taking ownership rather than imagining that you can occupy, if you know what I mean. And it's really just playing with the words here, and maybe it's semantics, but I think it gets to the heart and core of why the Occupy movement, despite all the good reasons why, dramatic change, systemic change from top to bottom is needed. And yet that, to me, is just absolutely not the right approach.
I mean, yes, we could do a whole show on Occupy,
and we will.
Reasons, its fallout. We can happily do that. I will happily, because I have written about it a couple times. I've been working on a TEDx talk that I want to try to give this year. And I tell this story going from the Tea Party to Occupy. Like, who
Right.
does that? Me.
So well,
So you know,
so you
there's a lot
may
to that.
you may know that in the January 2019 cover of Time magazine named one person as the cause of the economic meltdown. January 2009, rather. January 2009, the economic meltdown, you know, the big real estate bubble and the near, you know, the entire 180 mile an hour Maserati of the global economy had its engine seize up on the freeway. And Barack Obama, I gave him an A- on his handling of the economic crisis, because people have no clue how close the world came to economic freefall and the complete destruction of our global economic system, which we weren't ready for, right? My point is, there was one person on the cover of Time magazine, January 2009, who was blamed for that. The number one cause of the economic meltdown. Now, a number of people could have been on that cover, but there was one person who they chose somewhat randomly. Do you know who that was?
I'm afraid I don't, but I'm about to find out.
It's a trivia question. I thought maybe if you'd heard me talk about it. It was Angela Mazzillo, the CEO of Countrywide. And I had just left Countrywide, where I was a first vice president of strategic planning. So I had insight into the strategic plans of the companies, their goals, their objectives, how they were going about it. And I used to ride up and down in the elevator that Angela Mazzillo rode in. Occasionally I was in the elevator with him. I had deep insight, and I wrote a paper for my MBA program comparing Countrywide's corporate culture to the mafia, for which I got an A+. So I look forward. I look forward very much.
No, I have
this
made
topic
myself
with you.
a student of the financial crisis, because the financial crisis really upended my whole life. When I started college in 2007, my political science degree had value. By 2009, when I graduated, it had no value. I went to grad school, got another, and by 2011, I was a laughingstock. And I needed to understand what exactly had happened. And so I have spent the rest of the time learning about this. I have watched every documentary. I have read all the books. I have written the first 2 essays of my book, What the Hell is Going On? One is about capitalism, how we the people became we the corporation. And the second one is called 1977, The Rise of Discounters and Deregulation, where I talk about how the middle class disappeared. This year I will release a book called America's Lost Generation, where I compare what happened to millennials, especially in my year cohort between about 86 and 91, to what happened to young people in Japan in 1991 when their property bubble collapsed, and was then followed by the Asian financial crisis 6 years later. So this is a subject
When
on which
Thailand
I have
sneezed and the world caught pneumonia, right?
Yes, there's a couple countries who should not be allowed to manage their own currency. Thailand and Argentina are number spots 1 and 2. We need to pay people to keep an eye on those currencies at all times, because they are not ran well.
Well, that's a taste of things to come. My last question for tonight is getting back to the topic of religion, because, by the way, for the audience, the few that we have, and I don't know what's going on tonight. We've not had anyone post in the chat. I don't know if it's broken. We normally have some robust discussions there. We were looking to give away some free books. We can't do that when we don't have those chats. And we didn't insist or invite them. If it's not broken, I don't know what's going on with it tonight. But if there are any, perfect.
Can we make fun of one? Can we make fun of one unidimensional kind of response from Russell?
No, because that's a leftover from last time, and that doesn't even belong here. That's why I think it's all broken. That was a comment on last time.
I live stream the Cameron Journal News Hour every Monday at 6 p.m. And there are some weeks the comment section works. There are some weeks it doesn't. It depends. It's random. And I use the similar platform that we're using to do this. So I think we might have some chat. People are probably wanting to tell us things and can't. So
I think it's broken
if you have had something to say about what I've said, come with me to come catch me on Twitter and we'll chat.
Yeah.
At Cameron Cowan on Twitter.
Yeah, that's a
Yeah.
comment from last week that I've never seen that happen before, where a week-old comment appears in our chat. So something's broken. But
Yeah.
Yeah.
this we will get into these topics later. The question that I have for you, bringing it back to religion, because all of this is what I was about to say. All of this does have to do with religion. Again, Cameron, referring to your knowledge of the Bible, I'm sure you're familiar with the fact that most people don't realize this. We have a chat. So somebody got through. In the Old Testament, Moses brought an entire economic system, right? And we will get into this as part of our discussion on capitalism and Marx and whatnot. The entire economic system, you'll probably recall, with the land Sabbaths to let the land rest, and the debt forgiveness cycle that was tied to that. So debt forgiveness, systemic debt forgiveness, was written into the divine revelation given to Moses. And there are models that show that if that ancient economic system were applied today, it would solve many of the problems that we grapple with and cannot solve today, including
crop cycling and that sort of thing is not new. However, we only started doing it in industrial agriculture in this country during the Depression because of the Dust Bowl. Now, my family is from Eastern Colorado, where the Dust Bowl was at, and so we started doing not new but very ancient practices, terracing, all this type of thing.
Because we were forced to, because our practices were destroying the land.
Yes.
Right.
And yeah, and like,
honestly, I'm
right
not even
now,
referring. I'm not even referring to that.
A lot of problems in commercial real estate. Cameron's Journal News Hour, watch on YouTube. But like, would solve a lot of problems in the financial system now.
But the power of forgiving debts every 7 years, and the land, it being impossible to aggregate land over time, the land reverting to the families every 50 years at the year of Jubilee. So the most you could do was give a land lease on the remaining period of time. And if your grandfather really, really messed things up, his son would still bear a burden, but his grandson would have hope, because the land would return to the family and they'd have a chance to start over. Again, it sounds so revolutionary, but there was thousands of years ago.
Yeah, China has a similar system. Property does not pass between generations. You can sell it, but you cannot transfer property ownership, because China, being a 6,000-year-old civilization, knows, and this is true in Europe, once all the land is bought up by a few powerful families, it doesn't really change hands. To this day, the people that invaded Britain in 1066 still own all but 11% of the United Kingdom. It's only been 1,000 years, but they still own the dirt because it's gotten passed on. They've never had to sell, all this type of thing. And so so all but 11% is still owned by the same 30, 40 families from the Normans in 1066.
And go look at Orange County. The Irvine Company realized that was the way to go, right? Orange County out in California. So
yes. And in California, your property taxes are frozen from date of purchase and never go up until it's sold. So it pays in California to hang on to property for as long as possible.
Right.
That gets into individual collectivism and system incentives and systemic thinking. That will be its own episode one day.
Absolutely. Absolutely. So the final question, having established that all of this discussion does tie into religion and the role of religion in society, in the fact that I brought up that this was the law of Moses in the Pentateuch. Right. Sorry, I got to try to rein this in and make sure that the target audience sees some relevance to what we're saying. I see it, but I feel and fear a lot of it goes over the heads of people. Although I think from the comments, this is incredibly interesting and entertaining, even without my overlay. My question for you, though, how do you structure your relationships today with people who are still in a belief system which you have outgrown?
To be honest, beyond my parents, I really don't. One of the things about that world that is so tough is you lose your community. most everybody I knew from that world has either moved on and they kind of are living their own lives and don't want to talk to you because there's baggage there,
Yep.
or they're still in it and can't talk to you because that would jeopardize their placement in the social hierarchy and their church membership and all this type of thing. Because, you know, you're not supposed to, you know, be associating with people who don't live the
Well,
lifestyle sort of thing.
not to mention
Um,
Satan is wandering about like a roaring lion seeking whom he may devour, and talking to Cameron may well expose you, right?
Yes, exactly. You know, we're out there fighting the battles of the princes of the power of the air. Yeah, so it's that, so there's really nobody in my life left from that world. I had a couple friends stay with me for a little bit. Most of them have moved on. I mean, again, this is 17 years gone. And
Right.
so people have gone off, gotten married, done their thing, whatever have you. So I don't, beyond my parents, I don't really have to deal with that much. Thank God. I also live in Seattle, a city that is so atheist. We have an atheist church where they just get together and eat some food and have a nice chat. And maybe someone reads something from a Journal of Reason or something, Christopher Hitchens or something. And that's about it. And you know, and we, I mean, we're not a terribly religious city, so I'm lucky that I don't have to deal with that a lot because I live here where, you know, very few people go to church, sort of thing. um and so I don't really have to, so I really don't. um
And I appreciate
I
and
tell people,
understand.
if you're still associating with people in that world, and I have a friend whose friend has recently converted to that because of who he married.
uh,
um I tell people that friendship is over. They're not going to be able to talk to you because they're going to be under so much pressure to not associate themselves with you because you're not in the system.
Well, and this is why I asked this question, because again, getting back to the grounding of this show and what this show's about, the role of religion in society, I'm really now asking you from the other side of that equation, right? You're now representing a society that is completely separate from that. I often say that, unfortunately, and I do believe it's unfortunate, and you might feel the opposite, but unfortunately in this country, we've moved from freedom of religion to freedom from religion. And I understand, and I respect why many people feel that way, but I do feel it's unfortunate. So I'm reaching out to you who has moved on, who understands that world. And I'm a little bit sad. I have one tear trickling down here, even as I'm just loving the conversation and talking to you and getting to know you. I'm saddened by the fact that you're saying, thank God I don't have to deal with those people, because the role of religion in society should be to inspire, and it should be an integrative force. It should be bringing people together. Again, looking to Jesus, who said, leave the 99 and go after the one, which, by the way, is not what I'm trying to do here. I'm not trying to go after you. I'm trying to learn from you. I'm trying to understand your perspective and say, how can we continue to have a relationship? How can we find common ground, work on goals together? Because I'm sure you and I, intellectually and theoretically, will find we have much in common on solutions we might propose to improve society, aside from the religious aspect. But how do we structure those relationships between those who have moved on and don't see value in those kinds of social networks with their constraints and their challenges and their judgments? But how do we coexist with that in a positive way?
I mean, I think it's a difficult thing. Um in terms of, one of the comments says he left religion because they rejected him. That's only partially true. I had other opportunities to go back, and I could have engaged with that in a different way. I just no longer felt comfortable in that. So let's, you know, be realistic. You know,
Would you say that you left religion, that was certainly a trigger, but why, even if you had interest, why would you keep going back to be constantly rejected, even if
yeah,
you had
and
interest?
what, and it's also something where, you know, in most churches of the faith I grew up in, homosexuality may be quietly tolerated. It's certainly not allowed. It's certainly not encouraged. Now, I suppose if I were in the church-going mood, I could certainly scoot on over to the Methodists. They put a gay pride flag outside. They're like, please come on in. The Episcopalians too. Like a lot of mainstream Protestants are kind of like, no, yes, gay people come in. Like, and a lot of these places have female lesbian preachers now, sort of thing.
Right.
So times have changed. There's a lot of baggage for that for me at a personal level is why I don't do that. As far as society and freedom of religion and freedom from religion, this is where I'm a bit disagreeing with you. I think freedom from religion is a great thing.
Like I said, that was my assumption.
I'm over here with religion's the opiate of the masses. That's kind of me over here. I think I like my vision for America is to live in a secular, pluralistic society. I think if you want to have your own spiritual beliefs and do the religious thing on your own, that's fine. That's great. Please stay away from laws and government, because the only it's very hard to have a discussion with people who don't want you to exist. And this is true in a racial sense, and it's also true in a diversity sense for LGBTQIA. And unfortunately, the desire of people to live their lives in an authentic way can clash with people whose faith says those things are not allowed and is not for your highest and best, as Joel Osteen would put it. And I had this discussion with my mother last night, where it's a hot topic because I'm bisexual. I've never dated another dude. Would like to. That's just has never happened. I tend to date women. Don't know what that's about. But it's, a bit of a sore subject. And obviously, as I've now told you, there's a lot of emotional trauma that goes along with all of that. So it's a difficult thing. So I think, the United States pulling out 30,000 feet. The United States is very singular of being a nation that has two characteristics. One, being wealthy, and two, having a high belief in God. Those two things in any other country don't go together. The more religion you have, the poorer your country tends to be. The less religion you have, the wealthier you tend to be. The United States is the only exception to that.
What about Israel?
Israel is,
that's a hornet's nest, but
yes, in the stats that I have read, their belief in the rate that they report believing in God is still less than ours. Also, Tel Aviv is the gay mecca of the Middle East. You want a town that's gay? Get you a flight. They are doing the most in Tel Aviv. It's nuts. I've seen ads for those parties. It's real crazy. They're doing the most over there in Tel Aviv. Which is interesting because Israel is a society, very steeply in Judaism and religion, all this type of thing. And yet this sort of gay mecca has blossomed in the middle of that.
It speaks against many of the criticisms of Israel, and Israel touts itself as being, the only true democratic nation in that region, right?
Not under Netanyahu, but that's another discussion. Yeah. It's something where in Israel, if let's put it this way, if you're going to be LGBT in the Middle East, Israel is the only postage stamp of land you can live on without being stoned to death or thrown off a roof. Some other countries are getting a little bit more okay with it. The Qataris have kind of said, maybe we won't bother them as much. The Jordanians, well, as long as you keep it in private and don't flaunt it, we'll kind of leave you alone. But that's about as close as it gets.
I have a question then. On Wade's thesis here of religion should inspire, not coerce, can we take inspiration from Israel and the acceptance of and integration of the LGBT communities into the culture?
I should hope so. Yes. No, I should hope so.
Well, that's actually to both of you, actually. That's not just to Cameron. That's also
I think it would be great if we could find that level of open acceptance, but as we've found with Ron DeSantis in Florida and some of these other states like Tennessee and whatnot, we're not really, we're most of the way there. If you are cisgendered and homosexual, we've kind of come to terms with that in society, especially since 2013 when Obergefell went through, and now the Democrats have codified gay marriage into law. We've kind of come to a certain acceptance of it. Trans people aren't there yet. That took 60 years. Trans people aren't there yet. And we're certainly not there yet when it comes to being open in society with it. I firmly believe most people are fine with gay people existing, but they don't want to have to see it or deal with it or explain it to their kids. And that today is very tough because gay queerness has infected the culture at a very deep level. And there's a cultural struggle going on right now between whether that's going to be acceptable or not, and if that's going to be okay or not. And there's, currently people in power who are trying to outlaw it at every turn. So yeah, it would be great if we could reach a level of zen about the whole thing. Do I think that's possible in this country? Not until some people pass on. I think once the under 40s become the under 60s, kind of 20 years from now, the conversation will be totally different. But you still have an older generation hanging around for whom that stuff is just not okay. And they're not going to change. Ask me how I know.
Well, getting back to what you were talking about earlier, though, about your evolution in the wild nightlife scene, and you mentioned the term ethics. I don't feel like I really got clarity on how that fits in for you as you were answering that question. Not saying at all you were trying to avoid the question. The issue of ethics specifically. How does ethics play into your movement away from a situation which you kind of explained led to business collapse and other challenges, problems, failings, but you use the word ethics in that context?
Yeah, well, there's in that business from 2011 to 2013, much of the fraud that was committed um was in was enabled by myself and others, in terms of I did things, said things, towed the line on stuff that I knew was not true or not happening or would be true later, maybe, possibly, or whatever have you. And a lot of people wrote checks for a lot of money because of me. Not so much that they believed in who I was working for, but they
Got it.
believed in me.
Thank you.
And
No,
that's
no.
why and that's why I we have this joke among my close friends where I say we can only use my powers for good because I can convince almost anybody of anything. We can only use my powers for good because if I use them for bad, really bad things happen.
Right.
So we can only use my powers for good.
Mhm.
Yeah.
And that's and that's what inspired, and that's what, when it comes to that sort of thing, I learned out of that.
That's
One,
insightful.
I
Yep.
can only use my powers for good. And two, if you want things to go well and you want things to be successful and all this type of thing, you have to have high ethical standards. So that means you have to be honest, you have to be open, you have to
Yep.
be forthright, all this type of thing. And it would be a couple more weird things would happen before I really got there. But now that's how I approach everything in life, but especially in business. If somebody is not open and honest and transparent with what they're doing and how they're doing it, that's not for Widgery Omnimedia and the Cameron Journal. Flat out, I
Yep.
don't screw around with it anymore. That's
Thank
just
you.
what it is. But
So-
if you are, then great. Let's make some money together.
Yeah. Awesome. So this really leads to a question. So I said earlier I was going to wrap up, but I can't stop talking to you because it's so fascinating and I'm really enjoying this. And I can tell from the silence which has come over our guests who had an intermittent spurt of activity and who said, I'm just engrossed with listening. I can't comment. So, truth, right? You mentioned truthfulness, honesty. Pilate asked a question of Jesus, right?
Mhm.
So, Cameron, what is truth? How do you evaluate truth? If that's your ethical standard now of what you seek to rein in those powerful possibilities of things going in a direction that you're ultimately not comfortable with, and that you've recognized, hey, it's not a good thing for me or anybody else for me to go and do these specific things that involve somehow fudging the truth and betraying people's trust, whether not even intentionally, because I get you probably believed half the things you were saying yourself. You just underestimated your own power, right? Or ability
Yes.
to consistently, and then you recognize some of these
Or
other
the inability
behaviors,
of others to do their jobs.
right?
Yes.
But you were vouching for a whole set of circumstances, and you owned that. You owned that with your statement. Getting back to occupying versus ownership, right? You could
Hmm.
occupy somebody's trust, but do you really own it, right? So
Hmm.
anyway, I'm playing with words now again. But my point is, what is truth, Cameron? How do you assess that question in, what's next for you? And the next time you get, as a German say, on a green twig, right? In other words, it starts to grow for you again. Things start to take off again. What do you do differently, and how do you assess truth?
Well, truth is one of those things, like the Platonic forms, we can never know it because it is at a certain level unknowable. And it is something that I don't think we can necessarily always analyze a priori in the terms of Nietzsche and Heidegger. But I I think it's a matter really at this point of trust but verify. I care much less about what people say. I care much more about what they do. I am an observer of people. I'm a student of people first, but I'm an observer of people. I will observe and see what you do. And this is something as simple as, do you answer my emails? If we schedule a meeting, do you show up promptly? Do you show up at all in some cases? Those are the things that matter. If you say something has happened and I've given you money for something, where's the receipt? Where's the invoice? Where's the item? Trust but verify. Very simple things. And if I don't see those things, then I'm going to come to you and find out why. And if this is just the way you do business, I specifically choose not to work that way. Either be that in a personal relationship, a romantic relationship, or a business relationship, I don't work that way. Even when I'm planning a trip with friends, I will send screenshots of, hey, you sent me money for airline tickets. Here's your ticket. Like, here's where the thing is. Here's the real hotel reservation with the receipt for the deposit, so that I'm not just blowing your money. I'm spending it in the way that you had talked about. That level is something a lot of people are not necessarily always comfortable with keeping. If you can't meet me there, I'm not okay with that. Because
Well,
now at this point, that's just how I live my life.
thank you. Very, very well stated. I love
Mhm.
your ability to invoke Heidegger and Nietzsche and then get intensely tactical, right? I love it. And now a plug for our Baha'i friends. And I'm a Baha'i, as viewers know, with a deep, abiding trust in the Bible and the Word of God as it expresses itself anywhere. But here's a quote from the Baha'i faith: "The days of idol worship are ended. Only the purest motive, supported by deeds of stainless purity, is now acceptable to God." Right? Cutting through the hypocrisy, cutting through the virtue signaling, cutting through the professions of belief, the professions of faith. I don't care about what you profess at all. You can profess anything all the time, 24/7. And most of the things that are professed in the name of religion are unverifiable, right? That's how they gain power, because there's no way to determine whether their professions have any validity.
Yeah. Well, and especially when you get into things like, prosperity gospel and all this type of thing. People are giving money to this preacher, that preacher, because God will bring it back to you tenfold and all this type of thing. No, they're grifters and they're grifting on people. The only person getting rich is the people collecting the money, not the poor
Hey,
people who are sending it.
yeah,
They're just getting poorer.
it's just spiritual Amway, right?
Yeah,
You
and
too
I've
can
written
become
about
a
the
double diamond distributor.
Yes, I mean, and I've written about the prosperity gospel, and I've written even about prosperity memes and how prosperity memes are similar to the prosperity gospel. It's when you are offering people hope in tough times, in difficult days, as such as we are facing now, you have to be very careful, because people are giving you their heart at some point.
Yep.
you know, their hopes, their dreams, their fears, the hopes and dreams and fears of their children, all this type of thing. And so you have to be so careful with that. And with my readers, I take at a very deep level such responsibility with what I say, what I do, what I tell people, because I know people go and make decisions off of this stuff. When I write about stock markets, people go and change the 401k, which means it has to be right.
Yep.
One of my great regrets has to do with the pandemic and how I covered it. I got it wrong. I'm about to release an article talking about we have a vaccine problem. Sorry, folks, we have a vaccine safety problem. I have evidence. I have the receipts. And I was a big vaccine booster, and I kind of poo-pooed the people who complained about vaccine safety on Twitter and thought they were all wet. And I'm like, nope, I've got the receipts here, folks.
Wow.
I got it wrong. Now, not many people will come out and do that or say that, but I will. I will come out and say, yes, I've gotten it wrong here. And we have other problems to do with COVID. And there's multiple perspectives from this. And I've been compiling tweets and research and studies and all this type of thing to say, here's what we know now. Here's the problems we face. Here's how we might want to move forward. Very different from the sort of binary, bipolar nature of that discussion over the while, to say, I mean, yes, I do find it hilarious that people are willing to put literally anything else in their bodies other than a vaccine. But their natural sort of hesitation at such new technology that had never really been tested over any period of time was not entirely invalid. And
It's
we
a
now have some
skepticism.
yes, and we now have some studies to show that probably was a better idea than not, and we have a vaccine safety issue. Now, is everybody who took a vaccine going to drop dead tomorrow? Not hardly, despite some people might say on Twitter. But there is definitely some safety issues there. So when it comes to that, I take that responsibility for what I tell people very, very seriously. And when I get it wrong, I'm usually the first to say, yeah, I didn't get it right on that. Well, I had the best information I did at the time, but now we know differently. There's not many people you'll meet in media that are willing to do that.
Yeah, I think this is a good place to wrap it up, just because we could go on all night. And now I'm going to invoke the time when Paul was giving a sermon and somebody fell asleep and fell out the window. I don't know if you know that story, right?
I do. Yes. Yes.
But so we want to avoid that. But this has been just so amazing and fascinating. And I want to just say thank you. I have certainly seen firsthand the evidence of what you are just now saying about your willingness to openly and objectively explore. And yeah, it's without a doubt, I trust that having met you and talked to you here, that you do have the ability to do what we recently talked about on the show, when Nathan the prophet came to David after his sin of, getting Bathsheba pregnant and sending her husband to war with the intent to murder him. And Nathan pointed his bony finger at David and said, "You are that man, David." And David, a man after God's own heart, according to the biblical story, recognized his sin and repented. And I'm not putting what you're doing in terms of repentance, but I'm going to suggest to you and our audience that maybe somewhere in those experiences with the good and bad of the world of evangelical fundamentalism, it didn't hurt that ability to connect with the divine and use it as a mirror to objectively seek and pursue truth. Because I see you doing that. Wherever you got it from, Cameron, whether that sense has any accuracy, whether it came from the Montessori early training, or whether it's just an innate part of your nature, I just want to celebrate you for coming on the show, for sharing your story, and for giving evidence to all of our listeners of that. What some people have said that about me, a relentless search for truth, that my life has been a relentless search for truth. Many highways and byways, zigzagging, lurching forward from ditch to ditch. But I just want to celebrate and honor that. And thank you for exploring all these topics with us. Definitely want to have you back on the air. Any closing comments, Dan or Cameron?
Let's talk about philosophy next time. Cameron, what are you game for that?
Yeah. No, well, we have some certainly have some ideas bumping around over email about that. So I think that would be a lot of fun. And yes, and and less personal, less emotional, more philosophy and fun. So
yeah.
yes, no, this has been an absolute delight, and I'm so glad to be able to have this conversation and give everybody a little peek into what that world is like, because those churches are still out here, they're still open, people still go to them, and it's still, you know, part and parcel of America. And so it's important for us, you know, especially when you don't know that world, to at least try to educate yourself. And this is a great space for that. So thank you both for so much for having me on. I really appreciate it. And I look forward to the next time.
Awesome. Well, there you have it, friends. Thank you so much for joining into Created in the Image of God, the role of religion in society, talking to Cameron Cowan on his experience with evangelicalism and how he escaped and what he's up to now. We will have him back on. But for now, we'll see y'all next week, same time, same place.